The sun was beginning to set as the young boy walked slowly down the quiet street. His clothes were worn and dirty, his face tired from the long day. He had become used to the harsh life on the streets where every day was a struggle to find food, a safe place to sleep, and a moment of peace. He had learned to survive, but it wasn't the life he wanted. He often wondered what it would be like to live like the people he saw in the neighborhoods he passed. People with homes, families, and routines. But for him, that kind of life felt out of reach. Today had been no different than the others. The boy had spent most of his time trying to find something to eat. It wasn't easy, but he had learned how to make do. He had gotten a small bag of food from a kind woman who worked at a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going for the day. As he walked through the neighborhood, he noticed a house with a fence that looked like it had seen better days. The wood was cracked in places, some parts were leaning, and a few planks had completely fallen off. It was an old fence worn by time and the elements, but it was clear that someone still cared about it. The boy stopped for a moment, just looking at the fence. He knew the feeling of having something broken that you couldn't fix. He understood what it was like to watch things fall apart and feel powerless to stop it. For a moment, he wondered if the person who lived in this house ever thought about fixing the fence, or if they had given up on it like so many people did when things started to fall apart. As he turned to leave, a voice called out to him, "Hey there, young man. Can you give me a hand?" The boy turned around to see an elderly man standing on the front porch. The man was leaning against a cane, his face lined with age but still kind, with eyes that seemed to see more than most people did. He smiled at the boy, but there was something in his smile that felt genuine, as if he truly wanted help, not just out of necessity but because he was reaching out for companionship. The boy hesitated, unsure if he should approach. He had learned not to trust easily, especially with strangers, but something about the man's request felt different, so he slowly made his way toward the porch. "I'm trying to fix this old fence of mine," the man said, motioning to the damage. "It's been like this for a while, and I'm afraid it might get worse if I don't do something about it soon. I don't have the strength I used to, and I'm not much of a handyman anymore." The boy glanced at the fence again. It wasn't much, but it looked like a lot of work. Still, he didn't have anywhere else to go. Helping the man could give him a chance to stay off the streets for a while, maybe even earn a little something for his trouble. "I can help," the boy said, his voice soft but steady. "I know a bit about fixing things." The man's eyes brightened. "Well, that's a relief. I'm not expecting you to do it all on your own, but I'd be grateful for the help." The boy nodded, and together they made their way to the side of the house, where the old fence stood in disrepair. The man handed the boy a few tools, and they both got to work. The boy felt a strange sense of purpose as he helped the elderly man, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was hard work, but it was a welcome distraction from his usual worries. With every nail he hammered into place, every plank he straightened, it felt like he was doing something that mattered. As they worked, the man talked about his life. He shared stories of his youth, of a time when he had been full of energy and ambition, when he had built things with his own hands. He spoke of his family, his children, and the years that had passed since they had all moved away. The boy listened quietly, working alongside him. He had never known his own parents. They had disappeared from his life when he was young, and he had been raised in foster care. The boy didn't like to talk about it, but sometimes, when he was around people who seemed kind, he found himself thinking about what it might have been like to grow up in a family. The man told him how his wife used to help him with repairs around the house, how they had worked together to keep things running smoothly, but she was gone now and he was left to manage on his own. The boy could hear the sadness in his voice, but he also noticed the strength in it. The man had faced loss, but he kept going. There was something admirable about that, something that made the boy want to stay and help him. As they finished up the repairs, the man looked at the boy with gratitude. "You've done a good job. I couldn't have done it without you." The boy nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but he had helped someone, and that was more than he had done in a long time. The elderly man stood for a moment looking at the fence before turning back to the boy. "Thank you," the man said. "You've given me more than just a fixed fence today." The boy was confused for a moment. "What do you mean?" The man smiled again, his eyes softening. "You've given me a little bit of hope. It's been a long time since anyone helped me like this." You remind me that there's still good in the world." The boy didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected the man to say something like that. He was just a kid doing what he could to get by. But somehow in that moment he felt proud of himself. "Can I offer you something to eat?" the man asked. "You've worked hard and I have some leftover food inside. It's not much, but I'd be happy to share it with you." The boy hesitated at first. He wasn't used to people offering him anything without expecting something in return. But the man's offer was genuine, and for the first time in a long while, the boy felt like he deserved to accept. "Thank you," the boy said quietly. "I'd like that." They walked into the house together, and the man served the boy a simple meal, some bread, soup, and fruit. The boy ate slowly, savoring the taste, feeling a warmth inside that had nothing to do with the food. It was the warmth of being cared for, of being seen, not just as a homeless boy, but as someone worth helping. After they finished eating, the man looked at him again. "You know," he said, "if you ever need anything, a place to stay, someone to talk to, you're always welcome here. I don't have much, but I have enough to share." The boy didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness, this kind of offer. He had spent so long trying to survive on his own, never expecting anyone to care. But the man's words struck him in a way he couldn't explain. "Thank you," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." The man smiled. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that you're not alone." As the boy left the man's house that evening, he felt different. Something had shifted in him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely lost. Maybe it was the work they had done together, or maybe it was the kindness the elderly man had shown him. Whatever it was, the boy knew that his life had just changed in a way he couldn't fully understand yet. But for once, he felt like there was hope. The next morning, the boy woke up feeling different. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose that wasn't just about getting by. He had spent the night in a small makeshift corner of the man's living room, tucked away on an old couch with a blanket draped over him. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had hoped for in years. As the sun crept through the window, the boy sat up slowly, stretching his tired muscles. His body still ached from the day before, but there was something else now, something lighter inside him. The night spent in the elderly man's house had given him a small taste of what life could be like if he weren't struggling every day to survive. It had been a long time since he felt that way. He had forgotten what it was like to feel like he mattered, to feel like he belonged somewhere. The man was already up when the boy came into the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, and there was a warm glow from the stove. The boy's stomach grumbled, but it wasn't just because of hunger. It was the first time in ages that he had something to look forward to. The man turned around and smiled when he saw him. "I hope you slept well," he said. The boy nodded, a shy smile forming on his face. "Better than I have in a long time." "I'm glad to hear it," the man replied, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of the boy. "I'm not much of a cook, but I've got enough to share." The boy sat down and dug in, savoring each bite. He had grown accustomed to eating whatever he could find, often scraps or food left behind by others. The simple meal before him tasted like a feast, and the kindness with which it was offered made it even more meaningful. He didn't say much at first, lost in the comfort of the moment. The man didn't press him for conversation, though. Instead, he went about making his own breakfast, humming softly as he moved around the kitchen. After a while, the boy looked up at him and spoke, his voice hesitant. "I've never had someone do something like this for me before." The man paused and turned to face him, his expression softening. "I know what it's like to be alone," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you have to stay alone. People can be kind even when they don't have much." The boy looked down at his plate, unsure of how to respond. He had never known kindness like this, and it made him feel exposed, vulnerable. For years he had kept his distance from people, convinced that trusting anyone would only lead to disappointment. But something about the man's words made him think that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong all along. "You've helped me a lot," the boy said softly. "More than anyone ever has." The man smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It's the least I could do. But there's something about helping others, you know? It makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile. You ever feel like that?" The boy nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure how to explain it. It wasn't just the work they had done on the fence, it was something deeper, something that had shifted inside him. Helping the man had given him a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that he had spent so many years just getting by, surviving each day, that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly make a difference in someone's life. "I think I get it," the boy said quietly, his eyes meeting the man's. "But I don't know if I'm really cut out for much more." The elderly man sat down across from him, his face thoughtful. "It's not about being cut out for anything. It's about what you're willing to try. Sometimes the first step is the hardest, but once you take it, you might find yourself going farther than you ever imagined." The boy looked at the man, unsure of how to respond. It was strange to hear someone talk like that, as if his life could be something more than what it was. He had spent so long in survival mode that he couldn't imagine a different life, a life that didn't feel like a constant battle. But the man's words lingered in his mind, like a seed that had been planted, waiting to grow. As the morning passed, the boy helped the man with a few more small tasks around the house, sweeping the porch, trimming the hedges, and fixing a loose door handle. They worked in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The boy had never really thought much about the idea of work, at least not in the sense of helping someone else. But as he moved through the tasks, he realized that there was something satisfying about it. It wasn't just about the physical labor. It was about the connection to the man, the sense that they were working together for something bigger than just getting through the day. Around midday, the man looked at the boy with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "there are other people in the neighborhood who might need help. Not everyone can do the work themselves, and there's always something to be fixed or cleaned up. If you're interested, I could introduce you to a few of them. It's not much, but it's a way to start." The boy's heart raced a little. He had never considered working for others in this way, not for money or anything else. He had always been on his own, moving from place to place, never sticking around long enough to form any real connections. But something about the man's offer made him think that maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to do something that mattered. I could try that, the boy said, surprising himself with the words. "I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I could try." The man smiled warmly. "That's all anyone can ask for. Sometimes the hardest part is just taking the first step. After that, the rest will follow." The boy spent the next few days helping the elderly man with small jobs around the neighborhood. At first, it felt strange. He wasn't used to working for others or even talking to them for long periods of time. But little by little, he began to feel more comfortable. He met a few neighbors who needed help with their gardens, their fences, or simple repairs around the house. Most of them were kind, offering him a drink or a snack as a thank you for his work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Through it all, the boy found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Every job he did, no matter how small, gave him a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about earning money or getting by. It was about making a difference in the lives of others, about finding his place in a world that had once seemed so distant and uncaring. As the days turned into weeks, the boy's routine started to change. He woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, ready to take on whatever task came his way. He still wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The boy had been helping around the neighborhood for a few weeks now, and something was changing in him. Every day he woke up with a new sense of purpose. He still lived with the elderly man, but it felt more like a home than any place he had stayed in before. The small tasks he did for the neighbors were no longer just a way to get by. They had become something he looked forward to. One afternoon, as the boy was repairing a fence for a woman who lived down the street, he found himself lost in thought. The work was simple, nailing down a few loose planks, but his mind kept wandering. He couldn't help but think about what the man had said to him that first day they worked together. Sometimes the first step is the hardest, but once you take it, you might find yourself going farther than you ever imagined. The boy didn't know what it meant, but as he worked and helped others, he began to feel like maybe he was on the right path. It wasn't about fixing fences or cleaning yards anymore. It was about learning who he was and where he wanted to go. Helping the elderly man and the neighbors had given him a new perspective on life, and he found himself thinking about the future for the first time in a long time. When he finished with the woman's fence, she handed him a few dollars as a thank you. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to buy a small meal. As he left her house, the boy couldn't help but think about how different his life had become in such a short time. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness, helping someone with a broken fence, could lead him down this path. As he made his way back to the man's house, the boy's mind continued to race. The elderly man had always encouraged him to think bigger, to consider a future that was different from the one he had known. But what did that future look like? The boy wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He couldn't go back to the life he had before. He had seen too much, experienced too much to ever be satisfied with just getting by. When he arrived at the house, the man was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The boy stood there for a moment, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Hey," the boy said finally, walking up to the porch. "I've been thinking." The elderly man looked up, his eyes bright with curiosity. "About what?" "I don't know," the boy admitted, sitting down beside him. I feel like I'm ready for something more, but I don't know what it is." The man smiled softly. "That's a good thing, you know. Being ready for something more means you're open to possibilities. It means you're starting to see that life doesn't have to be just about surviving. It can be about living." The boy thought about this. It was strange to think of life as something to live, not just survive. He had spent so many years just scraping by, doing whatever he could to get through the day. But now, with the man's encouragement, he was starting to see that there was more to life than just getting by. There were dreams, hopes, and opportunities, things he had never considered before. "I don't know how to start," the boy said quietly. "I've always just taken whatever came my way. I've never really made any plans for the future." The man nodded. "No one starts out knowing everything, but that's okay. The important thing is that you're starting to think about it. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. Just take one step at a time and the rest will fall into place." The boy felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. It was comforting to know that he didn't have to have all the answers right away. He had spent so much time trying to figure out what he was supposed to do with his life that it felt overwhelming. But maybe the key wasn't figuring it all out at once. It was about taking the next step, whatever that might be. Over the next few days, the boy started to think about what he wanted. He had always liked working with his hands, fixing things, making repairs. Maybe he could do something with that. Maybe he could learn more about construction or carpentry. The idea felt right, but it also felt far away. He didn't have the resources, the training, or the connections to make it happen. One morning, after finishing a job for a neighbor, the boy sat down on the porch and talked to the elderly man about his thoughts. "I don't know how I'd get started," he said, his voice uncertain. "I've never really had a chance to learn anything. I've just done what I had to do to survive." The man listened quietly, nodding thoughtfully. "You know," he said after a pause, "there are places that can help you learn. There are programs, classes, people who can teach you what you need to know. It's not easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. The first step is always the hardest, but once you take it, you'll be amazed at how much you can learn." The boy thought about this. It seemed like a long shot, but it also felt like a possibility. For the first time, he realized that he didn't have to do everything on his own. There were resources out there, people who could teach him, who could help him. All he had to do was ask. "Do you really think I could do it?" the boy asked, looking at the elderly man. The man smiled again. "I think you've already started. You've been helping people, learning new skills, building a reputation. It's all part of the process. You just have to keep going." The boy felt a surge of determination. It wouldn't be easy, and he didn't know exactly how it would all work out, but for the first time he believed it was possible. He had a long way to go, but he had already taken the first step. He had made a decision to do something more with his life, and that, he realized, was the hardest part. In the days that followed, the boy started looking into different programs and classes in the area. It was overwhelming at first. There were so many options, so many paths he could take. But little by little, he narrowed it down. He wanted to learn more about carpentry, about building things with his hands. It was a practical skill, something he could use to make a living. But more than that, it felt like a way for him to finally build something of his own, a life he could be proud of. The boy didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, he was looking forward to it. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. And that, he knew, was the first step toward the future he had always dreamed of. The boy had been working hard, taking each step with a mix of hope and uncertainty. His life was beginning to change, But the path ahead still felt unclear. The days spent with the elderly man had taught him that transformation wasn't just about big moments. It was the small, consistent steps that made all the difference. He had been doing odd jobs for neighbors, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was a start. The money he earned wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for a few basic things, like a bus ride to the community center where he had signed up for a carpentry class. The first day he arrived at the class, he felt nervous. The room was full of people, most of them older than him, with more experience and more confidence. They were there to learn, just like he was, but it felt different for him. He was used to doing things on his own, to surviving in a world where he didn't trust easily. But this was something new. It was an opportunity, and he couldn't let fear hold him back. The instructor was a tall man with graying hair and a calm, steady voice. He welcomed everyone and explained the basics of carpentry, how to use tools, measure properly, and follow instructions. For the boy, it felt like stepping into a new world. He had never worked with wood like this before. Sure, he had fixed fences and done some repairs, but this was different. This was learning a skill that could lead to something more. It was a chance to build something that mattered, something real. The boy wasn't the fastest student, but he was determined. He paid close attention, asking questions when he didn't understand something. He practiced over and over, sometimes getting frustrated when things didn't turn out right, but never giving up. Every time he made a mistake, he reminded himself that learning was part of the process. No one expected him to be perfect, but they did expect him to keep trying, and that's exactly what he did. After a few weeks, the boy started to get the hang of it. He learned how to use the saw with precision, how to measure accurately, and how to join pieces of wood together in a way that would make a sturdy structure. He even built a small bookshelf in one of the classes, something simple but meaningful to him. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at his work. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. He had built something with his own two hands, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. One evening, after class, the boy went back to the elderly man's house. The man was sitting on the porch as usual, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The boy sat down beside him, still feeling the satisfaction of finishing his project. "I made something today," the boy said quietly. The man turned to him, his eyes lighting up. "What did you make?" "A bookshelf," the boy replied. "It's not much, but it's something," the man smiled. "It's a start, isn't it? And a start is all you need." The boy nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the man's encouragement. "I didn't think I could do it at first, but then I just kept going, one step at a time, and it turned out okay," the elderly man chuckled. "That's the thing about life. It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about showing up, doing your best, and not giving up. You've got a lot more in you than you think." The boy was quiet for a moment, thinking about the man's words. He had always been so focused on just surviving, on getting through each day. But now, for the first time, he saw the possibility of something more. Maybe he could build a future for himself, one step at a time. As the weeks passed, the boy continued to learn carpentry. He got better with every project, gaining more confidence with each piece of wood he worked with. But even as he improved, there were still moments of doubt. He wondered if this was really what he wanted to do, if it was too late to change his life. But each time he doubted himself, he thought back to the man's words. Just keep going. One day, the boy was working on a project for a neighbor when he was approached by a man he hadn't seen before. The man was dressed in a suit, and he seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood. He walked up to the boy, his eyes scanning the work he had been doing. "You're the one who fixed Mrs. Jones's fence last month, right?" the man asked. The boy nodded. "Yeah, that was me," the man smiled. "I've been hearing good things about your work. I own a construction company, and we're looking for someone who knows their way around tools, someone with a good work ethic. Would you be interested in coming in for an interview?" The boy's heart skipped a beat. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, but it also felt too big, too overwhelming. He had never imagined that something like this would happen. Not to someone like him. I don't know, the boy said, unsure of how to respond. "I'm still learning." The man's smile remained. "We all start somewhere. If you're willing to learn, we'll teach you, but I need someone who's reliable, who's willing to work hard. Are you that person?" The boy took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been working toward, the moment he had been hoping for. He knew he couldn't let fear hold him back. He had taken small steps to get here, and now it was time to take a bigger one. "Yes," the boy said, his voice steady. "I'm ready." The man shook his hand. "Good. I'll see you on Monday then." As the boy walked home that evening, his heart was racing. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, he had been living on the streets, unsure of where his next meal would come from. And now here he was with the chance to work for a construction company, to build a real future for himself. It was overwhelming, but it also felt right. When he arrived at the elderly man's house, the boy was practically bursting with excitement. He rushed inside to tell him the news. "You won't believe it," the boy exclaimed. "I got the job. They want me to start on Monday." The elderly man looked up from his chair, his eyes soft with pride. "I knew you could do it. I've always known," the boy grinned, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me that it was possible." The man smiled, his gaze steady. "You did it, boy. All I did was remind you that you had it in you. The rest was all you." The boy sat down next to the man, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He had worked so hard to get here, and now it was finally paying off. It wasn't just about getting a job, it was about knowing that he had the power to change his own life. And that realization was more valuable than anything else. The boy's first day on the job was everything he had hoped for and more. When he woke up that morning, there was a feeling in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Nervous excitement. He had worked hard to get here, and now, standing at the beginning of something new, he couldn't help but wonder what the future would bring. As he walked to the construction site, he replayed everything in his mind: the carpentry lessons, the small jobs for neighbors, and the encouragement from the elderly man. He felt ready, but at the same time he wasn't sure what to expect. The construction world was different from anything he had done before, but it was also a step closer to the life he wanted. A life with purpose. When he arrived at the site, the man who had interviewed him greeted him with a firm handshake. "Good to see you, kid. Ready to work?" The boy nodded, his nerves settling a bit. "Yeah, I'm ready," the man smiled. "Good. Let's get started." The boy's first task was simple: helping move materials and making sure everything was in place for the crew to begin their work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. As the day went on, the boy realized that construction work wasn't just about lifting heavy things and using tools. It was about teamwork, communication, and making sure everyone was doing their part. Everyone had a role to play, and it was up to him to learn his. Throughout the day, the boy worked alongside a few other workers who had been on the job longer than he had. They showed him the ropes, teaching him how to use the tools properly and how to measure materials accurately. The boy listened closely, trying to soak in every bit of information. He wasn't perfect. He made a few mistakes, but each one was a learning experience. At lunchtime, the boy sat with the others in the small break area. They talked about their lives, their families, and the work they did. The boy was quiet at first, still trying to find his place, but slowly he began to feel more comfortable. The other workers weren't so different from him. They had all started somewhere, and now they were part of something bigger, building homes, helping people, making a difference. By the end of the day, the boy was exhausted. His muscles ached from lifting and moving, but there was a satisfaction in it. He had worked hard, and he had learned a lot. As he walked home that evening, he thought about how far he had come. A few months ago, he had been on the streets, unsure of what his future held. Now he had a job, a purpose, and the beginnings of a new life. When he arrived at the elderly man's house, the man was waiting on the porch, as usual. The boy sat down beside him, still feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. "How was it?" the man asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "It was tough," the boy said, rubbing his tired hands together. "But I think I did okay. There's a lot to learn, but I'm ready for it." The man nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I knew you would be. You've got the right mindset. You're willing to work, and that's half the battle." The boy smiled, grateful for the man's encouragement. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this, but it feels right." "It does, doesn't it?" the man said. "When you find something you're good at, something that gives you purpose, it changes everything. You're no longer just getting by. You're building something." The boy looked at him, a new sense of understanding in his eyes. "I used to think that life was just about surviving, but now I see that it's about more than that. It's about building something for yourself, something real." The elderly man smiled again, his eyes twinkling with pride. You've come a long way, kid, and you're just getting started. Over the next few weeks, the boy continued working at the construction site. He learned more each day, how to frame walls, how to lay foundations, how to work with different materials. But it wasn't just the technical skills that he gained. He learned about responsibility, about working with others, about showing up every day and doing the best you could, no matter how tough it got. One afternoon, as the boy was finishing up a task, the man who had hired him walked over and clapped him on the back. "You're doing great," he said. "We've got a big project coming up and I want you on it. It'll be a lot of work, but I think you're ready." The boy's heart raced. This was the moment he had been working toward, the chance to prove himself. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. The man nodded. "Good. We start next week. I'll get you more details soon." As the boy walked home that evening, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. He was moving up. He was no longer just the kid who helped with odd jobs. He was part of something bigger now. He was learning skills that could take him places. And he was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. When he arrived at the elderly man's house, he rushed inside to tell him the news. The man was sitting at the kitchen table sipping his tea when the boy burst in. "They want me on a big project," the boy exclaimed. "I'm going to be working on a team that builds houses. It's a huge opportunity." The elderly man looked up at him, his eyes full of pride. "I knew you'd get there. You've worked hard and you deserve it. This is just the beginning." The boy smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me that there was more to life than just surviving. You helped me see that I could do more." The man nodded, his expression soft. "You did it, kid. All I did was point you in the right direction. The rest was all you." As the days passed, the boy continued to work on the new project. He was part of a team that built houses from the ground up, measuring, cutting, nailing, and fitting everything together. It was hard work, but it felt right. Every house they built was more than just a structure. It was a home, a place for families to live and grow. And the boy was part of that. He was making a difference. After a few months, the boy's reputation at work grew. People started noticing his hard work and dedication. The man who had hired him saw potential in him and offered to train him as an apprentice, a chance to learn more about the trade and eventually run his own projects. The boy was overwhelmed with gratitude. It felt like a dream come true. As he looked back on everything that had happened, the boy couldn't help but be amazed at how far he had come. He had started with nothing, living on the streets with no clear direction. But now he had a job, a purpose, and a future that was entirely his own. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, a kind elderly man who saw something in him and offered a chance to help. That one moment had changed everything, and now, the boy was building a future for himself, one step at a time.